as this is a national security incident. And we're working with Toronto Police and others to understand the motivations of those involved. There's obviously formal communication going on with our U.S. counterparts, the FBI, the Consulate itself here. We've had members at the Consulate here this morning, along with Toronto Police, meeting with staff here and their senior executive to discuss the incident.
Welcome back to Power Play. Toronto police are investigating after shots were fired at the U.S. Consulate in Toronto early this morning. At around 5:30 a.m., police say two suspects exited an SUV and proceeded to shoot at the building. No one was injured, but police say it's being treated as a national security incident and terrorism can't yet be ruled out. It comes on the heels of 3 other shootings targeting synagogues in the Greater Toronto area over the last week. And that all led to a debate and question period today on what the federal government is doing to counter those crimes.
We have criminals released on our streets, and now our synagogues are being shot. Iranian dissidents killed on our streets, and there's 700 IRGC terrorist agents on our streets.
This government's sanctioned over 200 individuals, over 200 Iranian entities. This government is investigating over 17,000 individual cases. We are protecting this country with 1,000 more RCMP.
700 IRGC terrorists in this country. It doesn't matter if they're banned. If they're on our streets, they are a danger. They're shooting up synagogues.
We want to protect synagogues. We want to protect community centers. We want to protect places of worship, which is why C9 is before this House today.
That bill that you just heard the Prime Minister reference and that you saw he and the leader of the Conservative Party debate is known as C9. It's the government's anti-hate legislation. Toronto MP Leslie Church is the government's point person on this, and she is with me live in studio right now. Hi, Ms. Church. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Hi, Vashti.
The criminal offenses related to hate, mischief, intimidation, harassment are already such, right? They're already criminal offenses. Police already have ancillary powers too, like creating exclusionary zones for protests. Is this a problem that needs a new law or simply better enforcement?
It absolutely does. In fact, we actually heard from police associations about the need for clarity in our laws. Canada has a long history of having laws dealing with hate speech and hate crimes, goes back over 60 years. But what we've seen is how hate manifests itself now on our streets and in our communities. The law isn't clear. And so C9 is the Combating Hate Act. It's an act that we campaigned on last spring, that we brought forward this legislation when the House came back in the fall, the first week back, and that we've been debating ever since. And the tools that it offers to law enforcement in particular to really crack down on some of the instances of hate and violence that we're seeing in our communities, communities like mine in the heart of Toronto, is very important.
In general, when you were first talking about introducing this bill, there wasn't a ton of political pushback to it. There seemed to be consensus among political parties around some of what you just described, right? That what was occurring because of, basically since October 7th, really, and the start of that war, was not acceptable on Canadian soil. There is one aspect of the bill, though, that has generated a ton of debate, and I think that Conservatives would argue, for example, has extended the period through which this is being debated. I know that your party characterizes what they're doing as obstructive, but they characterize this amendment, which is largely around an agreement you made with the Bloc Québécois to remove the defense of religious exemption. I looked through 50 years of the hate law appearing in court. That defense has never successfully been used. Why did you have to take out?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think that we know that the Conservatives have been divided on this from the get-go, even dating back into the last campaign. So it's not a surprise that they are looking for ways to try to stall and deflect this bill. When it comes to the religious exemption, I mean, we were looking for ways to move this bill through committee. The religious exemption, as you mentioned, has never been successfully used. It predates the Charter. The Charter of Rights and Freedom is what protects our religious freedoms today and continues to do so. So I would just say that as this bill moves forward, as we hopefully bring it back into the House for its final days of debate, that we have an informed debate about this, because there's been so much misinformation about the impact of what's called that religious exemption that hasn't been used, and that right now the bill relies on the Charter to protect Canadians' right to pray, to read religious texts, to teach religious texts. That is not impeded by that amendment around the religious exemption
why,
that Conservatives would have you believe.
Then why even remove it? And let's remove the Conservatives for a moment and refer to religious groups who have voiced concern about the fact that you are removing that defense. The National Council of Canadian Muslims were deeply concerned that the bill could undermine civil liberties and disproportionately impact already marginalized communities. The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, writing in a letter to the Prime Minister, removal of this provision risks creating uncertainty for faith communities, clergy, educators, and others who may fear that the expression of traditional moral or doctrinal teachings could be misinterpreted as hate speech. These aren't just Conservatives who are saying this. These are religious groups in this country. Again, if it has never successfully been used, why do what you did?
Well, I hope that the message that we are sending to all groups and all Canadians right now is captured by an amendment that we put in for greater certainty, to reassure Canadians and organizations who may have been hearing or fearing wrongly that this would somehow impede their religious freedoms. It doesn't. It won't. We have spelled that out in the bill that we're proposing to bring forward back to the House, that those religious teachings, texts, prayers, scripture are protected, that your religious freedoms are protected. I mean, the whole heart of this bill is about ensuring that Canadians can pray safely and in peace and proudly at the synagogue, temple, church of their choice without facing fear and intimidation. That's the purpose behind this bill. And so we are continuing to work with those organizations. We have been working, I mean, very much at the riding level, like in our local communities, to ensure that the right understanding of this bill and what it seeks to achieve and what it actually does is out there.
There seems to be, and I would not take away from the intent that you're describing, right? There seems to be, though, despite whatever efforts you just outlined, a failure to convince those groups of that, right? And ultimately, if you can't explain the utility of removing that defense, then why keep it in there? Is it only for political purposes? And does that not deflate the argument that you're making?
Well, I think there's a reality that we are a minority government, and to move our legislation forward, we need to work together with Parliament. And so this was part of how this religious exemption removal came about. But we wouldn't move forward with it if we weren't confident that the Charter protects the very thing that we're talking about here. That religious exemption, again, never been used successfully in law, predates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which specifically enumerates the right to practice your religion, for that to be protected. Like, that exists. So I feel like what we've seen here is the product of, yes, misinformation, yes, an opposition party that's been seeking to divide Canadians because they are divided on this and don't want this bill to come to a vote. And frankly, we're just saying the time is now. With what we're seeing in our communities, we need to be addressing hate, we need to be addressing intimidation, and ensuring that we're improving public safety for all of our constituents and all Canadians.
One of the points that the Conservatives have raised to counter the message that you just delivered, that basically this will affect nothing when it comes to the primacy of the Charter and your freedom to express yourself and freedom of religion, is statements made on December 9th by the Justice Minister, in which he said basically what you did, right? The bill will in no way, shape, or form prevent a religious leader from reading any religious text. And then on October 30th, testimony from Mark Miller, who highlighted a number of sections, for example, Leviticus, the Romans. There are passages with clear hatred toward, for example, homosexuals. There should perhaps be discretion, he went on to say, for prosecutors to press charges. Those do appear to be contradictory statements. And do you concede that the latter statement from Minister Miller would sort of buoy the criticism from the Conservatives and the concerns from those religious groups?
Well, I think we all have to go back and look at the legal standards that guide our approach to hate and hate speech in Canada, and that guide this bill. And I really think that one of the important things, I mean, precisely why we're talking about using this bill to create clarity, is to codify that definition of what constitutes hate in law, so that it's not just buried in Supreme Court jurisprudence. We want to have it there clearly so that people understand what it is, and that it's a very, very high threshold, which is why reading from the Bible or reading from the Quran or reading from the Torah does not reach that standard. And
but that's not what Mark Miller said.
Courts have been clear on that.
But Mark Miller isn't.
But the courts are what's determinative here. And the courts have actually said that that doesn't reach a level of hate speech, the legal threshold for hate speech. And I mean, Vashti, I think that this goes to show why this is a very challenging topic for Canadians and for organizations that are concerned about it, but also why, when we come back to the purpose behind it, when we think about what we are trying to achieve with this bill and the important public safety considerations that I think all of us are seeing. I mean, we're seeing now more than ever, and it's not just religious groups, it's cultural groups, it is the LGBTQ community. We're seeing all of these groups impacted by a spike in hate crimes and hate speech, manifesting itself in a way that is different than it was in the past. So this is a bill that addresses that. We've been clear with Canadians on this since the last campaign that this was our commitment, and right now it's time for Parliament to deliver on it.
And I do understand the points that you're making, but they don't, with great respect, Ms. Church, address what I put to you about Minister Miller's statement. You're saying one thing, the courts are saying one thing, Minister Fraser is saying one thing, all intended to assure those groups that have voiced concerns. Minister Miller, whether he believes it's correct or not, and many Canadians might agree with him, is saying something different. Do you concede that that will leave people with the impression that perhaps what you're saying and insisting will be the case with this bill is not so?
Well, all I know is what we have put into black and white in the bill. The Supreme Court's definition of what constitutes hate, which is a very high threshold, extreme detestation, vilification. That's a very high threshold that the courts have decades of jurisprudence to rely on. We've put that in the bill. We've put in a subsequent clarification that says that your rights are not impeded, your ability to read religious texts, to pray, these are not going to be impacted by the bill. So I think that it's easy to get lost in some of the misinformation that's out there about the bill, but when you come back to...
I'm not quoting misinformation, to be clear. I'm quoting something that the minister actually said.
But when you come back to the actual, what the bill does, creating a prohibition to block access to places of worship, schools, community centers, to prevent fear and intimidation. When people, Canadians, our fellow citizens, are dropping their kids off at schools and daycares, that's what this bill is trying to address, and that impacts all Canadians and all communities at this time.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Ms. Church, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it.